destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Cena.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Cena.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, April 20th, 2020. My name is Sam Cena. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps and steps and steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Cheryl Laird, assistant professor of government and legal studies at Bowdoin, on Steadfast Dems, how social forces shape black political behavior. Also on the program today, Congress near another aid deal, settling on one. Dems blowing it. Meanwhile, with small business aid drained, Shake Shack returns $10 million. And Ruth Chris runs the grift. Meanwhile, our testing regime, the one for coronavirus, is in disarray. Some may not even work. Meanwhile, the federal government is literally blockading medical equipment from reaching the states, at least before profit can be skimmed off it. AstroTurf and militia groups lead protests against the stay-at-home orders across the states, many of them just coincidentally swing states. Price of oil plunges. Countdown for Trump's bailout. That'll come quick. In Nova Scotia, a shooting kills 16 people. Meanwhile, in Australia, they will force Google and Facebook to pay for their news content. And thousands of socially distanced Israelis protest Netanyahu. Trump's EPA rollbacks will kill the most marginalized in our society. Meanwhile, Trump seeks revenge on the Indian tribes. And lastly, those donors to Trump's campaign are subsidizing his kids' girlfriends and wives. All this and more on today's program. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. It is a pleasure to have you. I am incapable, I guess, at this moment of assessing what year it is. I don't know about you, but I am exhausted. It is, this is a little bit tiring. There's such a weird divergence of the way that people are spending their or experiencing the stay-at-home order. I've gotten many, many emails from listeners and members of the program who are having a tremendous amount of anxiety because they have lost their jobs. The unemployment procedure in their state is a disaster. And or they haven't been able to get they applied on day one for the Paycheck Protection Act loan, has not come through. Others, people are, it's like a yoga retreat. And I feel like I'm somewhere in between. Not so much yoga-y. But obviously, I'm here. This is my job, and so very fortunate for that. My kids are a nightmare. Hopefully they're not listening. No, Mile is not a nightmare, and neither is Saul. But I have another family. They're starting to listen now to the show occasionally. So I just want to make that clear. And I've been a bit of a nightmare too, to be fair to the kids. So it's been a little bit difficult. Schooling at home is difficult. Not seeing your friends, difficult. And everybody's adjusting to the new normal. And one of the ways that we're doing it here is by having absolutely no sleep. So thus I open up the show by thinking it was 2018. So apologies for that.
The 420 celebrants in the crowd appreciated that slip up. So.
Oh yeah. Geez, I didn't even realize. So Matt, are you going to be okay today or?
Oh yeah, I'll be fine.
All right. Why is this day different from all other days is what Matt is saying. Let's jump right in on this. This is interesting. This is a slight moment. One of the things that I have been thinking about is there's been a lot of calls for media outlets to not cover Donald Trump's briefings. And particularly, TV ones, so that it can't be a TV show, so that he can't have the opportunity of having this sort of like free rally every day, because it's not as if the information he's giving has any value. It does not appear to be. And I'm still not 100% sure of where I sit on that question. I think obviously the newspapers should be covering it. But I am inclined to believe that maybe there shouldn't be live coverage by news organizations that have any, sense of integrity. They can break in and do, in my mind, like what we do, which is show the highlights. If there was any genuine information that came through in these instances, we would present it to you. But he just lies. He doesn't, it's just a series of lies and then ramblings. And then I think it's also of value to the American public to know that this lunatic is just ranting and raving when he's up there. And then there's all sorts of really horrible things that are happening. We sort of like starting to piece together the story of, and we were talking about it quite a bit a week or two ago when it was clear that what the U.S. government was doing was sourcing stuff overseas, flying it into the country, and then giving it to private distributors, not to distribute it because they have the resources in which to reach and the supply lines already existing, but basically to say, like, you can auction this stuff off. Because if it was exclusively for their ability to get these medical products to the places that need them in the country, then the U.S. government would say, here's the equipment that we have secured for you. You put this out there because you have the supply lines. You can make a 4% profit on it, a 5% profit on it, or, show us what your normal profit is and we'll give you 3/4 of that. But instead what they did is like, here's the stuff, have at it. And they basically started an auction site. And some of it was sold overseas into other places and in extraordinary markups. And so what states started to do was they started to secure their own stuff. And having to secure their own stuff, and there's a story in the New England Medical Journal that outlines what officials in Massachusetts did to try and secure personal protection equipment. They literally had to drive in the middle of the night, like 7 states away, to get 18-wheelers that were labeled. The 18-wheelers were trucks that had signs on the side that said it was like produce. And as they were picking this stuff up, agents from the FBI came to intercept the delivery of these personal protection equipment. And they apparently let it go through after they were jostling with the people. Department of Homeland Security stood it. It sent people down there to stop it. They ended up getting part of it back to Massachusetts. But the other part is given to a private entity to then make more profit on it. This is insanity. This is, I mean, it's, I imagine there are a lot of countries in the world where this goes on that have gone on in the past, Latin America and Eastern Europe. There's been a lot of, this type of just rampant corruption. I imagine this type of stuff went on in our invasion and occupation of Iraq. It is just sort of stunning that it is happening here in this country. I mean, we've always had some measure of corruption, of course, but this is another level, I think, in terms of the stakes that are involved here, and in terms we're talking about medical equipment. It's pretty amazing. But that was a brief detour into saying that there are moments that we're going to continue to play from the presidential briefings because, one, sometimes they're amusing. Other times they cut to the quick as to what's going on. This one is amusing, one hopes. Here's Donald Trump. He's very, very mad at Maggie Haberman, who I think largely has been an access journalist from the New York Times in many respects. I don't know. Did she write her book already? I think she did. And so maybe, and who knows, maybe this is an indication of who one of her sources is. And now she's, this is how she's sort of like maintaining some of her access now by reporting that Mark Meadows apparently has been having breakdowns, which I can understand. But I enjoy it because of him. Here is Donald Trump being asked that question about Mark Meadows.
Real information and responsible and thoughtful dialogue from their elected leaders and from the media. The media's been some very honest, but some very dishonest. You know that. I mean, I even read a story where Mark Meadows, a tough guy, he was crying. This was Maggie Haberman. She won a Pulitzer Prize for her coverage of Russia, but she was wrong in Russia. So was everyone else. They should all give back their Pulitzer Prizes. In fact, it turned out that the crime was committed by the other side. The crime was not committed by this side. It was committed by the other side, a bunch of bad people. You saw the reports coming out over the last 2 weeks. They got caught. So Maggie Haberman gets a Pulitzer Prize. She's a third-rate reporter, New York Times. And we put her name up here last week. You saw that. People thought it was a commercial. It wasn't a commercial. It's like a commercial, but it wasn't a commercial. It was just clips. And because we exposed her as being a bad reporter, what happened is she came out and said, Mark Meadows was crying. And they made it sound, I said, Mark, and it's okay if he did. I wouldn't, look. But I think he was crying probably really for the wrong reason. They had it down. But he's not a crier. And if he was, I've known criers. I could tell you people that that are very famous. They cry. And that's okay, too. But it was a nasty story in so many ways. It was fake news. And she only did it because we exposed her for being a terrible, dishonest reporter. She is. I've known her for a long while. I haven't spoken to her in a long time. I made the mistake. I take a picture with her at the desk a long time ago. Every time she does a story, if I say, I haven't spoken to her in many, many, many months, maybe years. I don't speak to her. She's fake. A lot of people are fake. A lot of people. We get a lot of fake people. But what happens is she writes this story as retribution, puts it in the New York Times, and the New York Times is a very dishonest newspaper.
Okay. I have a lot of thoughts about this, but one of which is this is why it's not really a briefing about coronavirus. Because he's spending his whole time trying to attack a reporter for reporting. And I can't tell if he like took this opportunity because he really wanted to knock Mark Meadows. It'd be like the equivalent of like, I know there's a lot of stories out there about, Matt huffing glue, and it's okay, but it's not true. Matt huffing glue.
They say Mark Meadows wears a diaper too, but I haven't seen it. And even if he did, people wear diapers. Adults wear diapers.
It's true. It's true. I see bulkiness around his pants, but that doesn't mean anything. It could mean something, but it's not true.
Maggie Haberman is trying to reinforce toxic masculinity on Mark Meadows by making fun of him when he cries. Let men cry.
Oh my God. Such insanity. Hey folks. Oh, this is good news. This is the one thing that has actually helped my sleeping a little bit. As you know, in life, you can make small changes that can lead to positive lifestyle changes throughout your life. The right towel turns a bathroom into a spa. Wearing certain loungewear turns function into luxury. You can make all these upgrades with Brooklinen. Brooklinen is the internet's favorite sheets, but they're also home to bedding, loungewear, towels, and more with over 50,000 5+ star reviews and counting. Now they have everything for life essentials, including shower curtains, bath mats, robes, totes, the final details that make your big upgrade. Folks, since the lockdown, I have purchased 2 new pillows. I have gone in, I've decided that my stiff, unforgiving pillows, I need a little bit more comfort. Maybe I'm just getting old, but I got the plush, non-allergenic or the hyperallergenic ones, of course. And I am loving it. First of all, I got the extended versions of the pillows. What do you call those? The kings. Because it's great for pillow fights with your kids because they can't see the second half of the pillow coming ever. But it's also incredibly comfortable. I love the new pillows. And I got a set of pillowcases, the cool, crisp kind that I like that they sell. They have multiple types of sheets. I have been so happy with Brooklinen, and we've had them as sponsors for a couple of years. And I'm Brooklynizing just about all of my bedding and whatnot. Brooklinen.com. It's the perfect place to start making small changes that make big differences. Brooklinen is so confident in their product that all their sheets, their comforters, their loungewear, their towels come with a lifetime warranty. Go on, make yourself comfortable. Get 10% off your first order and free shipping when you use promo code majority only at brooklinen.com. That's Brooklinen, BROOKLINEN.com, promo code majority. Brooklinen, everything you need to live your most comfortable life. And also during the lockdown, not so easy to freshen up your wardrobe. I was very fortunate. I grabbed one of the shirts that I got from Stitch Fix, my thermal crew. And I've been living in that quite a bit. Don't wear it on the show because it doesn't have a collar, but very comfortable. It's my cash wear now. And in the world of clothes shopping, I think many people realize there's no consistent sizes. So why do you have to try and guess if a medium is really a guest or constantly have to return clothes that you purchase online to find something that fits perfectly? Well, Stitch Fix is a personal styling company that makes getting the clothes you love effortless. It's a completely different way to shop that's all about you every time. To get started, go to stitchfix.com/majority. You set up your profile. They deliver great looks personalized just for you and your colors, styles, and budget. You pay $20 styling fee for each fix, which is credited towards anything you keep. So you can schedule at any time. There's no subscription required. You get shipping, returns, exchanges are easy and free. Stitch Fix does the hard work for you, making great styles effortless for everybody, including men, women, and kids. Folks, I have a little bit of blockage when it comes to dressing well, and Stitch Fix has been a huge help for me. I got my they look like desert shoes, I guess, a little bit, but they're a little bit nicer. They call them the leather chukka or chukka. I don't know. But it's great. A new pair of shoes. I got that Pilsen Thermal crew. Got that Nashville 5-pocket straight fit pants, which is nice. I'm off of the carpenter style pants I used to wear all the time. Sent back a mock neck sweater because I don't do mock necks. And I was debating about my flannel shirt they sent me, and it was appropriated by my daughter. So everybody won in that one. It's great. It was super easy. And I was super happy with the things that they picked out for me. You can get started today at stitchfix.com/majority. You get 25% off when you keep everything in your fix. It's everything in your box. You keep it, 25% off. That's stitchfix.com/majority for 25% off when you keep everything in your fix. stitchfix.com/majority. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to be talking to Professor Cheryl Laird about steadfast Dems, how social forces shape Black political behavior. We'll be right back after this. We are back. Sam Cedar on the Majority Report on the phone. It is a pleasure to welcome to the program Cheryl Laird. She is an assistant professor of government and legal studies at Bowdoin College, and co-author of Steadfast Democrats: How Social Forces Shape Black Political Behavior, written with Duke professor Ismail White. Cheryl, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
And now I got to tell you, I interviewed Davin Phoenix, who wrote The Anger Gap, How Race Shapes Emotion in Politics. I maybe it was 5 or 6 weeks ago now. I have lost sort of semblance of time. Mm-hmm. And he referenced your book. And so I was fascinated by this. And now, of course, I think in the interim, or maybe it was just prior to this, we had our presidential primary on the Democratic side, more or less decided by the votes, or it started a cascading, I guess, effect by the votes of African Americans in South Carolina. And this is, it's a fascinating topic. It's also a fascinating topic. I just finished watching an ad put out by the Trump campaign targeting African Americans. So I want to dig into this, and really the nub of the book is this, what you call the process of racialized social constraint. But before we get there, let's talk about the just give me a broad assessment of Black voters, and I guess the fact that we have different, just like we do with white voters, we have different sort of, I guess, subsets of voters within that rubric.
Yes, I think people often assume, because they see the block voting of African Americans towards the Democratic Party, that there isn't diversity of political thought and political ideas and even perspectives within the community. And so one of the things we talk about very early on in the book is that we can see diversifying political views within the African American community especially after the civil rights movement, and as also as economic opportunity has allowed for increased diversity amongst the group in terms of their economics. So there are more upper class blacks, more middle class blacks than they had been before over time. And with that, right, that means that motivations that we often think politically would shape how somebody engages in politics have changed for blacks, yet we continue to see this behavior of the strong partisanship. And so we shouldn't minimize the diversity at all. In fact, the diversity helps to provide some perspective into why we can think about the social behavior we observe of blacks, because we have black conservatives and black liberals. There are blacks who are particularly positioned on certain economic policy. There are blacks who are positioned on certain social policy. There are blacks who are very highly religious. There are African Americans who are very far to the left and progressive. And all of them are engaging, though, in a collective political behavior that is, to some degree, right, having to consider how much is the group interest going to be prioritized over self-interest motivations, and also the social aspect of it. And I can talk a bit more about that. But I mean, essentially, there's a lot of diversity within the Black political perspective and viewpoint.
Okay, and so the group interest is really where we start to get to that sort of racialized social constraint. But before we get there, how do we see this manifested? The range of interests within the context of the African American community, because when it comes to the general election, what are we, like 89%? I think it is of black folk vote for the Democrat, which is, I think, the next closest sort of voting bloc might be Jews, around 75% or something. So, well in the distance. But so where do we see those differences manifested? In the primaries, or in terms of like engagement in politics?
Yeah, so I would say, the primary season is probably one of the opportunities to see that, and especially this primary season. I think this one is a very unique circumstance because of how we have seen the various candidates that were coming in and who was in the lead early on, right? So we had Bernie Sanders, we had Mayor Buttigieg, and different people coming in, and people not really knowing where African Americans were going to fall. I think the political diversity then speaks to a lot of the ways in which people were shifting in their politics, right? At some points, people were considering that Joe Biden may not be as strong with the African American community. Maybe Bernie Sanders would do better. Maybe another candidate would do better. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with the political diversity that you see there, right? That there are some African Americans who are, for instance, fairly progressive individuals who align very strongly with the viewpoints of Bernie Sanders and the political views that he has, but may be risk averse, right? And if they're trying to consider who can win in the election against President Trump, they may be more likely then to lean in a way that would then go with a candidate that would be more likely in their mind to be somebody who could beat President Trump. And in that case, that might be Joe Biden, right? There'd be other individuals who are actually aligned more politically with Joe Biden and see his politics as similar to their own. And so they are going to be individuals who would then support him without having any kind of discrepancy between their own viewpoint and the viewpoints that are being presented by his candidacy and his campaign. So the primary is often the place you see that. I think oftentimes you can also see where the political diversity comes about in even state or local level races, right? That's not necessarily the focus of our book, but it is another arena where you can see that candidate competition in local elections or state elections and races can often be very shaping to how people play out in terms of their support for candidates, especially if there are multiple, for instance, African-American candidates running in a race. And you can also see it too in people's understandings of how do people meet the goal of trying to get racial justice, right? And sometimes that comes forth in dialogues and discussions, often in public domains, where people have conversations around, what is needed to try to improve Black circumstances and various viewpoints politically and ideologically about, anything from like a Tim Scott type of individual who is in the Republican Party, arguing much more for a more conservative, individualized type of approach to more collective politics. And so you can see it manifesting in different places, but especially in this electoral race, I think a lot of it was these considerations that were happening in the primary.
and I guess at the very least, let's move to, I guess one more thing too that I think surprised me is the how many black voters identify as conservative, and what does that mean in that context?
Yeah, so I think it is interesting, right? Because especially in political science, right, typically the literature shows us, and the scholarship on it shows that when people are identifying as conservative on this measure, that is a fairly strong predictor of their partisanship, right? So that should be kind of correlated very strongly with ideological leanings to conservative and their partisanship. For African Americans, it doesn't. And I think for African Americans, ideology is not as meaningful in the same capacity as the group identification and the group interest and the understanding of the political norms, which ties to partisanship. So in this case, ideological diversity can exist, but the partisan norm is what is the standout, right? Which is really what is serving as the way in which one is going to engage in politics. So I think they have an understanding of what conservative ideology means, but it doesn't necessarily go one-to-one with partisanship, because partisanship for the group is a completely different understanding that I think we traditionally see from other groups who participate.
Well, I mean, I guess I'm asking because I'm not even sure what constitutes conservative anymore. And it seems to me that, well, I mean, honestly, can you tell me what set of policies are associated with conservatism? And for me, if I was really pressed at this point, the only thing I would say would be a certain amount of, being anti-choice, maybe also having some measure of LGBTQ prejudice, and then really it's in this day and age, it's whatever Donald Trump says it is. I mean, and a certain amount of of white supremacy that may not be obviously articulated in that way, but that's why I'm sort of fascinated by what, if you have a sense as to when an African American says that my ideology is conservative, I mean, what does that mean? They, I really don't know.
Yeah. It's interesting, right? In our book, we tried to actually assess it, keeping in mind that the measure that we typically use basically asks people to put themselves on an ideological scale of liberal to conservative. So it doesn't actually define it for them. So then we had to think about, okay, well, what other ways can we tap into conservatives? Because I think you're right. There is an association now with conservatism that has gone to a much more polarized space than we had seen before. And African Americans, conservatism could be anything for that community to be, for instance, somebody who religiously is conservative, like religiosity, because African Americans as a racial group are some of the strongest, participants within the Christian faith, right? And so that could be identifying as conservatism, but it's not specifically explained in that question. So we looked at other measures. And so some of the things where we see some indicators of African Americans who are conservative has to do with government guaranteeing jobs and income, support for government health insurance plans, government action to help the poor, government reducing income differences between the rich and the poor, and seeing more conservative leaning on that, looking at how the government should do, what government should do to try to improve standards for African Americans. We're seeing more conservative leaning on that question, saying that the government shouldn't intervene. So a lot of the questions that we tried to tap into were related to central government intervention into issues of equity going on. And do we see more African Americans leaning in favor of that or against that? And how has that shifted over time? And so that's what we have seen and observed in the data. But I agree with you, the conservative moniker and the label itself is fraught, completely fraught, and very polarized with the environment. And I think African Americans would potentially identify as conservative, but really because partisanship and the social engagement around partisanship serves to be one of the largest things in terms of how they engage politically, is really where they are going to be the most likely to make sure that they are in alignment with where the group is expecting them to be.
All right. Well, so let's talk about that sort of notion of the group and of these social constraints. There, you have some really, you've recounted some really fascinating, sort of studies that manifest this. But explain to us the thesis. Well, and you've sort of hinted at it on some level that there is that these varying different, factors are outweighed ultimately in certain circumstances when it comes to Black voters making a choice.
Absolutely, right. And I think kind of like the key takeaway from our book is that Black partisanship is maintained through Black social networks. And so when we are looking at Democratic partisanship over the last several decades, we need to understand that although you have these things that have changed the diversity and the political diversity of the community and even economically, that over time we continue to see this Democratic Party norm, especially when it comes to like presidential elections. And that we see that start to get formulated in this way, or at least kind of manifesting in this way when it comes to Democratic partisanship in the civil rights movement, right, and the consolidation at that time. And a lot of that has to do with the civil rights legislation that is passed at that time, and also the avenue for even being able to participate in politics electorally and even in representation happening for African Americans through the Democratic Party. And through that, a norm, we argue in the book, is established and a norm is maintained and reinforced for the community that basically is the understanding that to be Black is to be Democrats. And supporting this norm of Black partisanship is important for the group, and it is expected by individuals that they do that as members of the group, right? And it's understood that that is what one should do, that this is the best way for the group to achieve the goals of political advancement and opportunity and equity is if we do this, right? And that this norm goes back historically, that we can see norms of collective action and behavior going on for African Americans all the way back to slavery, right? When it comes to abolitionist movements, efforts to try to escape plantations, which we talk about in the book, as well as during the periods after slavery when Black African Americans were part of the Republican Party in mass, that all of those attempts and efforts are done as a collective means to try to make sure that African Americans have voice in the system. And it's a majority-based system. So when you're a minority group, this is going to be the effective way of doing that. And we argue that the ability for this norm to maintain itself over time has a lot to do with racial segregation. Right? That African Americans are in communities that are predominantly, if not all Black, are dealing with day-to-day interactions that are predominantly, if not all Black. And the norm of political participation is clearly understood, right? And so that then leads to an in-mass behavior that we've observed where African Americans participate in politics this way because there's an understanding that this is just what we do. This is how we do this. And so in the book, we try to examine this by looking at ways that we can measure the social constraint behavior. Essentially, can we show instances in which an individual is being asked by an African American, or they are dealing with the interaction with another African American versus somebody who's non-Black, or even in the absence of anybody, and show that there is some sort of pressure that people understand that leads to this partisan behavior. And we argue that this type of socialized behavior is important to understand because this then gets at the diversity component of political and economics within the Black community, that African Americans who have motivations that potentially could lead them to voting for the Republican Party, right? Like self-interest motivations economically, they may be very well off. Politically, they may be people who lean conservative, like the way you defined conservative often is viewed. And yet we don't see that happening in large numbers. And we argue that social constraint, that they feel restrained in doing that. And those who feel more comfortable potentially going against the norm that's understood are individuals who aren't going to be dealing with that social aspect as much. In fact, those people are probably in fairly racially diverse social networks that allow for those ideological views potentially to manifest into their partisan behavior. So that's kind of a summing up of the book there. But I mean, essentially, this is what we're thinking about. That is a social process. And if you want a group to participate in a collective behavior in a majority system as a minority group, that one way to do that is to basically behave in this way. And in order for people to do it and know that that's something to be done, that there also needs to be some repercussions for people who decide not to. And that's where we talk about this idea of social sanctions, essentially people getting reprimanded by the group openly for deciding to basically go away from the understood norm, which is voting for the Democratic Party, and doing something else. And we've seen that happen. Kanye West was like one of the most popular examples, right. Steve Harvey. But in all of our studies, we're trying to really examine that.
Okay, so and I want to walk sort of back through that, and certainly I want to talk about one or two of the big studies because they're sort of fascinating manifestations of this. But to be clear, the social constraint, I mean, you're talking about sort of like how it operates, how it's enforced. I just want to talk for a moment about the impetus. The impetus is that there are a fundamental set of transcending issues that impact everyone who, I mean, this is the impetus for the constraint. There is a fundamental set of transcendent issues that impact Black people, regardless of their religiosity, regardless of their how much money they make, for the most part. I mean, across the board, right? That's the argument. Is that, or is that even part of it? I mean, how much of that is just simply a function of, look, the bottom line is, we're going to do better on some very fundamental, basic rights issues with Democrats than we will with the Republicans. Is that basically what that sort of first building block of that social constraint is?
I think so. It has both of those components to it, right? So I think one of the building blocks for sure has to do with what issues are directly affecting African Americans, right? And the long history of race being so defining to the Black lived experience, and that has been foundational, right, to how America has been designed, to our politics, to our institutions, and to your day-to-day interactions and lived circumstances, right? So foundationally, right, as a group, it has become understood that individually trying to achieve uplift becomes an issue, right? That it is not enough because race becomes so defining. So collectively, it is understood then that in order for individuals to basically make moves ahead, right, the group itself also has to be able to do so, right? That individually, you're always going to fall back into the race issue, right? And that's regardless of kind of how much you've succeeded or even moved up or had economic success or had particular things happen for you. And so that is going to be very shaping to that. I think the understanding then of the two parties is that over time, especially in this contemporary period, that the Democratic Party has become seen and viewed as the party that would allow for more advancement for the group, not only from the legislation and in the policy that has been passed when those individuals have been in power, but additionally that most of the Black elected officials that we even see now in office and have come to power through the Democratic Party, right? So the opportunities for the realization of Black political involvement, not only through the voting aspect, but actually elected office and officials, has occurred through the Democratic Party. So they are viewed as the one that is going to be the most likely to speak to these group interests relative to the Republican Party, right? So it is very pro-partisan behavior. I think sometimes we get asked, is it anti-Republican? Like Republicans have done racist things in the history, Southern strategy, certain time periods after the radical Republican period, after slavery. But it's a pro-social, it's a pro-partisan behavior, right? It is an idea that this particular party is going to be the one that best embodies what is needed for the group to be able to achieve some of the equity and equality that it wants.
Okay, I want to put a pin in that specific thing because that has implications as to whether people are, how people are going to come out. I mean, because when we talk about the primary, right, it was not a we've described that vote, at least in part, as a negative partisanship vote in some way, right? That the driving force of supporting Joe Biden was obviously in part like, okay, I'm simpatico with him politically, but the other driving force was this is the guy who's going to beat Donald Trump. I mean, it was a vote for Joe Biden more often than not. I mean, this is true of all Democrats, across the board, was a vote against Donald Trump in some way, or it was driven by that. So how do you? It
has some drive.
I mean, how do you?
It is driven some part by that. Yes.
Okay. Well, we'll swing back around because I also want to ask about. I mean, ultimately get to, the Obama to no one voters and those type of folks in 2016. But before we get there, so tell us of I don't know. I mean, there was a study that I'm trying to think of the. I don't know if I have it right in front of me here, but there was a couple of studies that really stuck out for me. Would you go through one or two of those that sort of like manifest this? I think you did one experiment where you had people in a room and you had different, there was also where you had a white person and a black person come in and say where they were going to contribute money.
Yes, I can talk about it for sure. So in the experiment, we were trying to, again, basically get some sort of measure of racialized social pressure, right? So from a social science perspective, what we want to do is capture that empirically in some way. And so what we were trying to do here is then design a study that we could test pressure. How does pressure look? And how do we make sure that it's a racialized pressure? So we set up a circumstance in the 2012 election where we had people being told about this opportunity for them to donate to campaigns. And in fact, we were going to be providing them with the money to donate to these these organizations that were supportive of particular campaigns for the candidate, right? So no money was actually donated to any campaign. It's all for the purpose of the experiment, and everybody was debriefed after it was done. But essentially, what we have people do is that we tell them we're part of this organization, we're working with the university, and we are asking about people having this. We're basically providing this opportunity for people to do these donations. And so here you get $10, and there'll be 2 boxes in a room that you're going to go into. And for every dollar that you put into the box will be $10 donated to this organization that supports this campaign. Right. And so in doing that, we basically set up 3 groups. So in one group, an individual went in who's African-American by themselves to do the donation. And then in the second group, we paired that individual with a white person. And we told that white person who was working with us as part of the study that when they walk in the room, they should say, I'm giving all of my money to the Obama organization. Right. And then put all of their money into the box. And then a third group was created, and that was with an African-American person being partnered with the person who was the participant in the study. And that person was also working with us, and we told them to do the exact same thing. Now, we argue that that statement, I'm giving all my money to Obama, right, is the one part of the pressure being placed on an individual, because now the norm is being stated in the room. And additionally, that the race of the individual is going to influence the amount of money that then gets donated to either the Romney or the Obama campaign. And what we see happen is basically we see, one, that there isn't much actual donation to Mitt Romney at all by any individual. I think we had 2 individuals in the whole study who actually donated a couple dollars to Mitt Romney. But we see a larger number of donating to Obama, but that number being varying based off of the presence of a white individual or the presence of a black individual. Essentially, when a black person is there, people are more likely to give more of their money to the Obama organization than if they're in the presence of a white person making that statement about the norm, or if they're by themselves, where they don't have to worry necessarily about the pressure of the norm. And so in this case, this is manifesting through a donation process as opposed to like, for instance, a vote. But still here, like, we argue that that is just one example where we can show, right, that there is some pressure. It's a very conservative test. One wouldn't expect it to have that much of an effect, but we do get to control for race and know that even a white individual cannot place that type of social pressure on an individual that we see, for instance, from African Americans when it comes to the partisan norm for the group.
Which had more? And just to be clear, the subjects of the test were African Americans. So which had more, or no? Was it also, were there also white folk there too?
There wasn't any white participants.
Okay.
So we did it strictly with African-American participants. And then the only racial variation was from the person who was working with us in the situation of the Confederate. Yep.
So what was the ranking? Like when a black person came in and said, I'm giving all my money to Barack Obama, that got the most amount of donations from the test subjects. When the white person came in and said it, did that outweigh when nobody said it, or was it vice versa?
So they were about equal statistically, and particularly, but it was definitely statistically distinctive when it was the African-American individual, because there's a self-interest component as well, which is, and I should have said this a little bit earlier, because the person could donate the money or they could decide to pocket it, right? So they were also in a situation where they could say that I'm going to give this portion to Obama and then put some more and put some back into their pocket. So we were seeing how much did they decide to take and how much did they decide to give in the donation. And again, here with the white individual, not as much relative to the condition where you have African Americans by themselves, African Americans with another black person in the room with them.
And what did did you get a sense of what was driving people? Was it just simply shame? Was it just a sense of like, hey, wait a second, this is a good idea? I mean, do we have a sense of like what the emotional response is made up of, or is it varied?
So this is probably where we could have partnered with Davin at that time for the emotional response, but we did get to look at, for instance, motivations when it comes to people's belief about money, right? So how do people think about doing money over anything else? And we found that people who are most likely to defect away from the norm, right? Defect away from this understood party norm. And in this case, we argue that Barack Obama is like the biggest manifestation of the party norm being achieved, which is a black individual within the White House. That those individuals who are more likely to defect from that are individuals who have a high premium placed on money in their mind, money over anything, money over their social relationships, money over their friendships. So we asked a couple questions about that. We also assessed how much people understood the role of social sanctions, right? So essentially, how do people understand the behavior that might happen to an individual who defects from the norm, and that was playing in people's mind, but essentially people who believe that these social sanctions were right or wrong didn't make a difference. It was more so the awareness of the fact that these sanctions exist. And if they are aware of that, right, that would then also influence the donation and the likelihood of defection as well. But particularly the value on money. The other thing that I think was interesting is that there's a concept in the field that we have known as a linked fate. And it essentially it means that I believe what happens to the group has an influence on my individual life. And people have argued that this is one of the biggest predictors of black partisan behavior. But we argue that it actually isn't necessarily enough to provide us that insight into partisan norms, because how do you maintain this over time just off of that belief? And in that measure as well, linked fate didn't really make a difference in donation. So even where you fell in terms of how strongly you feel like the group has an influence on my individual life did not necessarily affect the donation, right? It really did have a lot to do with the social aspect as well as where people valued money over their social relationships. So that was kind of one of the assessments we were able to get. We didn't do a measure of emotional assessments, but I do think that there is an understanding of the social interaction that is really key to understanding the donation.
Okay, so one is like, if I'm really money centric, I'm not going to vote for the Democrat. I mean, that seems to be fairly consistent across across the race and across, I would imagine, like that is that has been at least a big chunk of the Republican in the history of the Republican Party, at least the modern history. There's been some that's not a terribly shocking impetus. The other is more like a negative constraint, I guess, which is this social sanctions. Like what does that mean? Like my mom is going to get pissed at me, or I mean, what does that look like?
So for the Black community, I mean, well, your mom being pissed at you could be one thing because she could be an enforcer of of the norm. But for instance, there are terms and language that is used to refer to somebody who seems to be going against the group interest. People might call them an Uncle Tom or a sellout, and that will be seen as somebody who's betrayed the group in some way. And in particular, when it comes to the party norm, I think that's often when we see that language thrown out. So when people refer to, for instance, people like Clarence Thomas, Ben Carson, even Tim Scott, Mia Love, often that language is talked about in this way, to the point where a number of Black Republicans have openly spoken about the idea that they find themselves often pushed aside by African Americans because they've decided to be part of the Republican Party. And again, those social relationships and the social sanctions are effective because of the ways in which race is very defining to the social network of African Americans. If you weren't worried about what other African Americans are thinking of you, because those relationships aren't very defining to your day-to-day, your economic gains, your lived experience, because your relationships are more diverse, then those won't necessarily be things that are stressful or a problem for you or something that you would worry about. But for most African Americans, they are dealing with social networks that are heavily defined by race. So that's what allows those sanctions to work. On their own, they wouldn't necessarily be effective unless you are legitimately worried about those social interactions. And it's the racial segregation that allows for that to be maintained over time, right? Because Blacks still remain in communities that are heavily segregated. I mean, we're seeing a lot of that even come to light within the COVID-19 crisis, right? That those historical factors still shape Black life, and it would play a role here when it comes to those sanctions. So your mom could be one of the people who calls you a sellout. I mean, family and friends, people. We asked about that, friends and social networks in the book. We asked people, if you had friends or family members who knew, for instance, that you potentially did not vote for Barack Obama, right? What would they think of you, or how would they view you? And most African Americans noting that they would have an issue, right? That those people would be very strongly upset with them or bothered by the fact that they decided to do that. And that would be concerning to them, right? That would be something that they are worried about.
But it could also be clergy. It could be a celebrity. It could be just, friends down the street type of thing. I mean, it could come from anywhere. Is that the idea?
It could come from anywhere. I mean, I think in the case that we are using, for instance, in the study that we did where we saw that effect, African Americans the Black people that were in that study didn't know each other.
Right.
Like we deliberately pulled students that were separate from the individuals that were participating so that they had no relationship. But, one of the things that's talked about within African American communities, and I think a lot of communities of color, are fictive kinship, right? Or these ties together with people, even though they are not biologically related to you, that those relationships and connections to other Blacks are still there, even if you don't know them personally. People even talk about, passing another Black person in an area, especially that's predominantly white or not as largely African American, and passing one another and giving each other a head nod, like just an acknowledgement of seeing somebody else. You don't have to know that person, but you do know that that person is Black. So that plays a big part of it too. So it doesn't have to be someone you directly know to be able to enforce that.
And it doesn't even necessarily have to be anybody actively enforcing it. I mean, it sounds like, if I'm in a room full of people I don't know, it is the fact that I look around and I see that they are also Black, and I am projecting on them their expectation of me and the group.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's exactly right. Exactly right. And that's exactly how we discuss it in the theory.
So what do we make of this is fascinating because so what would that say about voters, in Black non-voters or Black Obama to no one voters in 2016? I mean, what was there not enough? I mean, where do those folks fit in terms of, did they perceive the situation as like they're in that room, just to use that experiment as a template? Were they in that room and nobody came in to say, I'm giving all my money to Barack Obama? Or were they in a room where a white guy came in and said, I'm giving my money to Barack Obama? I mean, what explains these people in this instance not feeling that pressure?
And these individuals are, can you say those again? I'm sorry. I think I missed that part of it.
There's a significant part of the African-American community, places like, let's say, Milwaukee and in Detroit. And I'm speaking specifically in the context of the 2016 election, who had voted for Obama and didn't vote this time, or voted for nobody specifically for president. I mean, is there a way to sort of glean and say like, oh, well, this is indicative of the fact that maybe there was not enough attention paid to sort of trigger that sense of you have an obligation to go vote?
Yeah. So, the primary contest is an interesting one. And I will say our book focuses heavily on the general election. So potentially what you could have is a motivation problem, right? So not that people didn't understand the norm, but they may not have felt motivated to participate in the electoral process. And in a primary contest, right, there's a typically strong partisan. So a large majority that we saw of in major states where Joe Biden was able to gain the leverage that I think led him into his presumptive nominee position right now, where we saw high levels of Black participation within the primaries. But I agree with you that there are some African Americans who do. Well, I'm talking about abstention, right?
I'm specifically talking. I'm sorry. I'm specifically talking about the Clinton election, the Clinton-Trump election.
Oh, in the Clinton-Trump election. Okay,
Yes.
so that's, again, I think it's a motivation, a situation there, right? Like not an understanding necessarily of the norm, but a turnout. Now, I will say though, in the Trump-Clinton election, one of the things to think about there is the comparison, right? So Obama is the full-on kind of realization of what this norm is supposed to do, right? Like if the goal is to have say and influence in politics, then one's involvement in this norm, right, is the goal is not only to have policy and decisions being made that are going to be important for African Americans, but it's also gaining power in the office, right? So Obama is like the massive realization of that by having him become the president of the United States. I would never compare the numbers, and I don't think Ishmael would either, of the turnout that we observed of African Americans in 2016 to any of the Obama years. Like that would be weird because he's an exception in terms of what he embodies, right? He is, he's the first Black president. Now, if you compare those numbers to 2004, before he runs, African-American turnout is basically the same, like they are statistically indistinguishable. So I think that that's one thing to keep in mind is the uniqueness of the electoral contest with Obama. I don't think Clinton was going to be able to ride in on a wave of that same level of Obama turnout because of what Obama represented. However, I also agree to the point that you're pointing out here, which is that there was potentially a motivation issue amongst some African Americans from reports that I heard from field workers, from different campaigns, as well as people even on the ground in certain communities like Milwaukee, like you mentioned, being one example, arguing that the Clinton campaign didn't do as much investment into on-the-ground grassroots work. And I think that that's a big part of the considerations around the social network aspect of political participation for Blacks when it comes to their Democratic partisanship, because you really do need to energize the networks. You need to energize the communities. You need to energize the social community that is there. And if that wasn't being done in key states because an assumption was made that that support would just be there at the level that we had seen from Obama, you would be mistaken, right? And you would really need to do that work. And from what I heard, at least read, even in the New York Times and other places, was that some people were reporting that they did not see that level of campaign investment coming from the Clintons. There was some discussions of issues related to African Americans, but again, on the ground, not as much effort there potentially. And so if you're going to deal with the mobilization problem, that's when you would see that, right? You wouldn't necessarily see as much turnout. But again, I don't think the numbers were that much lower. In fact, I think they're statistically the same between 2016 and 2004.
I see. And just to be clear, it's not a question in this instance. I mean, from your perspective, that it's about talking about the issues at that point, right? I mean, because presumably, if you go back to that experiment, Barack Obama is still the same Barack Obama, regardless of who is advocating giving him money. And it's the sort of I guess the peer pressure on some level, the social constraints, as you call it, that are the ones that get people to go and actually drop the cash in the bucket.
Yeah, no, that is correct, right? And so if you wanted to, and that's why we begin our book, I think, really thinking about, for instance, an example like Alabama with the Roy Moore and Doug Jones race there, right? Because it was a surprise when people woke up the morning after that race had gone on and found out that Roy Moore had lost, but Doug Jones did not win, and people were trying to figure out how that happened. Well, there was a huge grassroots organizing that was going on the ground there, but led heavily by African American women in the state of Alabama, trying to ensure that people turned out to vote. So voting and the participation and the exercising of the norm becomes a social process, and if that is not a focus, right, it doesn't necessarily it doesn't mean that your policies alone or your positions alone are going to do enough to motivate people out there. Like, you're going to have to get on the ground. You're going to have to get those networks in place, because African Americans are also dealing with extensive challenges when it comes to the franchise, right? Like, the participation we even observe of Blacks is extraordinary in the face of numerous things that get put into place to try to hinder Black participation in the electoral process, right? We just watched that in Wisconsin. Like, we just saw that happen, right? So you really have to think hard about what you're going to do to motivate individuals. And if people aren't being as motivated by potentially the campaign, even if they agree with the policies, what are you doing on the ground to get people to turn out?
And that efforts have to be, I mean, according to your work, it sounds like need to be, at the very least, that person-to-person contact. That contact has to come from African Americans. I mean, it can't be.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, fair enough.
Yes. No, it would need to be person-to-person contact.
It's fascinating work. Cheryl Laird, Steadfast Democrats, How Social Forces Shape Black Political Behavior. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.
We'll put a link to that at majority.fm. Thanks again, Cheryl.
Thank you.
All right, folks. We're going to take a quick break and head into the fun half in a moment. Just a reminder, it is your support that makes this show possible. By becoming a member, you not only get extra content every day, almost every single day. I mean, we can't do it every single day, but I don't know, half a dozen days out of the year that we don't, if that many. But you're also supporting the show in a time where obviously ad rates are down across the board. I encourage you to, obviously, if you're in a position to support this show, support this program, but support all the shows and the media outlets that you like. I mean, one of the things that I'm trying to do is to sort of expand. I mean, we pay for a lot of the content that, that we use on this show, at least subscribe to a lot of these magazines, but I'm sort of expanding the universe in which I pay for that content. If I read the thing once every 2 months now, I am going and subscribing, just because of, across the board. It's not quite as easy for me to go and, support a local restaurant. But this is one thing that you can do, and to help sort of maintain an infrastructure of media in this country. It's important. We're seeing layoffs in like LA, I mean, everywhere, really. And so, if you have the means, of course, and if you don't, send us an email at majorityreporters@gmail.com. And if you've ever sent one in the past, and for whatever reason, I don't know what our leakage is, but probably I miss 5 to 10% of the requests at any given time. Just keep doing it. Understand it is not you. It is me. And sometimes I just miss them. We just get a ton of emails and I just miss them. And sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm going to do that one. And someone starts yelling in my house. And so I go and deal with it. So if you are someone who can't afford a membership, send us an email at majorityreporters@gmail.com. If you're someone who can, by all means, great time now to become a member. And we are now accepting through our system via Kyle PayPal as well. So you can go sign up at jointhemajorityreport.com, and there's a myriad of different ways in which you can pay. Not Bitcoin still, but I don't know if anybody trades in that anymore. Also, like I say, support other shows. TMBS will be live again tomorrow night. You can support that over at patreon.com/TMBS or watch it at youtube.com, The Michael Brooks Show. The Nomiki Const Show. Nomiki will be with us tomorrow, but you can find that at patreon.com, The Nomiki Show, or at Nomiki Const on YouTube. And the Antifada, Jamie's going to join us in the fun half. Check that out, patreon.com/the Antifada. Matt, what's happening on the literary hangover side? You guys are talking Bacon's rebellion while also performing your own rebellion on your Twitch channel. Is that right?
Oh, I don't know about quite that. Well, what we did do is one of the most informationally nutritious Twitch streams people have ever seen. I played A Plague's Tale: Innocence while playing selections in a word-to-text program from Michel Foucault's Discipline and Punish on the Plague Town, and on Daniel Defoe's A Journal from the Plague Year. So check that out. It's very multimedia. People's minds were blown. A few random people happened across the stream that didn't know what they were getting into, but they enjoyed it. So yes, please subscribe to me at twitch.tv/literary hangover.
I can't help but just think that there's some PhD candidate, in, I don't know, University of Kansas, who's just taking a break, and then it's just what? People just sort of freaking out, talking about this weirdo who's playing this stuff while he's playing this. Yeah, what game are you playing? Aren't you supposed to say that? A
Plague's Tale: Innocence. I said that up front. Very interesting game.
I didn't know if that was the book or the actual game.
No, that's the game, and you sort of go through a medieval town, and it's during the plague. Very interesting. There's the white.
Very apropos.
Yes, it's all very relevant, folks. All very relevant.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. 646-257-3920 is the phone number. We will take calls starting now. We will also take your IMs on the app at majorityapp.com. You can sign up. You don't have to sign up for anything. You just get the app. It's free. Majorityapp.com.
Also, speaking of Twitch, Jamie's at the Antifada has a Twitch today, so she'll probably tell us about that later.
Okay, good. Well, Jamie will hop on the stream and see you in the fun half. Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous. You're a little bit upset. You're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906 501-457-238-56-27. 1/2, 5 eighths, 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook.
Throw our hands up.
Ooh. Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
We are back. Sam Cedar on the Majority Report. It's the fun half, ladies and gentlemen. Jamie is joining us via audio. Jamie, are you there?
Hello. Yes, I am.
There you are. And we have... Well, how come I don't see it? Oh, there it is. I had my window like shortened, and so I couldn't say, oh, hi, Jamie. Yes, the answer is yes. I have, Mile and I cut my hair. There is a little bit of a divot right here. That was the first cut. And I was like, wait, but that's about it. I mean, aside from that, it's a little bit like Flock of Seagulls, right? Isn't that the thing that happened at that time?
Oh, yeah.
Really
I was not
here.
born yet.
I think
Right,
it
of
needs to flop over a little bit more to be Flock of Seagulls. But
well, we'll get there. But overall, did not a bad job, I think.
Yeah. Definitely did a better job than I did once upon a time when my boyfriend asked me to cut his hair and I told him, I don't know how to cut hair. And then he made me do it anyway. And I screwed it up real bad and he got mad, lol.
Well, all right. Well, I mean, live and learn to that guy. All right, let's take a quick phone call. Calling from a 416 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam. It's Sebastian from Canada.
Sebastian from Canada. How are you? What's on your mind?
Hey, it's always a treat when I call in. I get to hear you all on the hot mic with Jamie and the social distancing.
Oh, there you go. All right, great.
But anyway, yeah, I just want to say, I've been listening for years to this show, and I never had the money for it, but I'm getting paid during the pandemic, and I can finally afford it, so I'm going to buy a membership.
Oh, thank you. That's very much appreciated.
Also, I want everyone to listen to Literary Hangover. I've been checking it out past couple of weeks. Great stuff.
Great.
Hell yeah.
But anyway, the reason that I called is not strictly related to the pandemic, but it's something that has come up from time to time in the media and once or twice in relation to the pandemic. And it's people talking about intelligence officials having said one thing or another and how it proves, one person right or wrong about whatever it is. And during this pandemic, we've seen comments from some officials about the government's preparedness and the effectiveness of its response. And I want to draw what I think is kind of an esoteric but important distinction between what's called tactical intelligence and what's called strategic intelligence. So, where strategic intelligence is more often conducted by civilian officials, Tactical intelligence is conducted more often by military officials. And so the purpose of strategic intelligence is to inform policy planning at the national level. But the purpose of tactical intelligence is purely for the military to assess the threats to it. So like estimates of enemy manpower, firepower, communications, supply chains, mobility, geography, weather, stuff like that. And so I want to be careful not to say that the military has no politics. I mean, obviously it does, but it's purely about securing like a material, physical advantage in armed conflict. And the reason that I want to draw this distinction is that military intelligence officials are more often reliable for descriptions of like physical material reality, whereas civilian intelligence officials, they're more prone to have sort of ideological or political commitments that might motivate the public statements that they make to some extent. And this can be a deliberate motivating factor, like they're consciously advancing some kind of ideological agenda. But it can also be the case that the person has implicit biases because of their ideological commitments, and that these biases manifest in the person's sort of honest assessment of strategic intelligence. And just to be clear, I'm not saying that the military isn't political, but I am saying that it deals more often in describing sort of raw physical reality, and that this is a distinction just to hold in mind when we reference intelligence officials when we're trying to advance one point or another. Like, it's a lot more convenient to advance it by citing civilian strategic intelligence analysts than it is to do it by citing tactical military intelligence analysts.
Right, fair enough, because the military intelligence tends to be a lot more motivated by just self-interest, and therefore,
yeah, exactly.
And I understand it. I appreciate that distinction. Thank you for the call, Sebastian, and thank you for the support. Speaking of Canada, this is a 3.5 minute long video, so we're going to speed it up. But I think the point is made anyways. This is a guy, Patrick 22. It's a YouTube channel. He is in Canada. I think he said Vancouver. Right now, we have all sorts of stories of this $1,200 stimulus checks, obviously not being cut for the vast majority of people who are getting them. Even people who got it direct via direct banking, they didn't get the money for their kids. They didn't. It's been a disaster. The support for small businesses been a disaster. Just the failure of this country to be able to provide aid in this instance, if you are not a major corporation, because that spigot, that's like that hose has already been, that's pipe that's already been laid, and they just put whatever it is they want to deliver in that pipe. It gets out there. They've already gotten that money. This Canadian shows how easy it is to apply for assistance for in light of the COVID-19 unemployment. This is just sort of disturbing in a myriad of ways. Play.
Let's get right into it. So there's been a lot of discussion around the CREB, or the stimulus checks around the world going out for the coronavirus quarantine. So I live here in Canada, in Vancouver, BC, and I just wanted to give you guys a look at the process for getting it in Canada. So this is the full process for getting the CREB, or the stimulus check in Canada. I'm just going to call them up.
Welcome to the CRA Canada Emergency Response Benefit Line. For English, press 1. Pour le français, please enter the 9 digits of your social insurance number, temporary tax number, or individual tax number. Pipeline, you are getting it.
He doesn't want you to hear his number.
Okay, so you enter your insurance number into the automated system.
If you are eligible for payment, you will receive it by direct deposit. To confirm your identity, please enter your year of birth. For which period are you applying? For April 12th to May 9th. Press 1. To repeat, press star. Confirm the following to receive your payment. You have not applied for, nor are you receiving, the Canada Emergency Response Benefit or Employment Insurance Benefits from Service Canada for the same eligibility period. You reside in Canada. You have not quit your job voluntarily. You earned a minimum of $5,000 in income within the last 12 months, or in 2019, from employment or self-employment income, or provincial or federal benefits related to maternity or parental leave. And one of the two following situations apply to you. You have stopped working for reasons related to COVID-19, and you continue to not work and expect to remain in this position for the entire 4-week period for which you are applying, and expect to receive no more than $1,000 in combined employment or self-employment income. Or you have been paid employment insurance regular benefits for at least 1 week of benefits since December 29, 2019, and have used up your entitlement to those benefits. You must certify that this information is true and correct, and acknowledge that making a false declaration is a criminal offense. If you certify that you meet all the requirements, and understand that you must repay any payments to which you are not entitled, press 1. If not, press 2. To repeat, press star. Please wait while we process your request. Your request has been processed. You will receive a payment of $2,000 by direct deposit within 3 business days. Thank you.
All right, awesome. So that was the full process. So it took me 2 minutes and 30 seconds. And last time I applied, last month, because you have to apply every month for it, stating that you don't have work again. Last time I applied, it took 3 days to get wired into my account.
Now what I would like to do, if we had the ability to do this, we've seen enough. I would like to replay, and we don't have the ability to do this, the look on Jamie's face when when he hits the button and your request is being processed. Your request has been fulfilled. And Jamie's just big face is like this. Like, it's shocking. It's shocking. That's it. Boom, done. Now, to be fair, he has to do that every month. But like, there's nothing that I have that I have ever experienced that deals with the phone that was that easy. I don't care what it involved. Automatic payment to my cable bill, whatever. None of it. And there, the guy gets his payment.
It makes me so mad. Like, I hear from my friends all day, every day. I've been trying for hundreds of times to get through to unemployment to see why the money that I've already been approved for is not being dispersed to me. And almost none of my friends have gotten through.
And I mean, I've heard stories of people trying to track down people who work at unemployment on their Facebook pages to get their application. I mean, it's been insane. It has been insane. The system is set up on a state by state basis. And it depends on what state you live in as to how much this is the truth. It is set up to discourage people from getting their payments that they are legislatively entitled to. And it's just, we have a system that fundamentally is built to deny people, mostly non-wealthy people of all sorts, any type of support in general. And of course, because it exists that way in general, it's not like you can just develop these systems in a time of crisis. And so you get $4 trillion pumped out to corporations. I mean, that's why, I mean, look at what the stock market is doing now. The stock market, as far as it's concerned, it's just like, this is just like an average night, Monday. They were down a little bit. The idea that there's 22 million, and we're going to find out on Thursday after last week that there's probably closer to 28 million people out of work. We got, we're fully liquid. We've got $4 trillion. We're going to be going in and we're going to be the foreclosures on the homes. We're going to go in and buy those. People,
go ahead.
People can't afford to rent out their apartment. Boom, we'll go in, we'll buy it. And when things come back, we're going to own everything because we're getting free money right now. That's the dynamic that's happening. I'm getting emails from because sometimes I sign up to these education reform things. They are just you can't even believe it. They're frothing at the mouths at this point. This is a huge opportunity for all of these hedge funders and online education outlets and charter companies. I mean, it's
insider traders who may or may not work in government.
Yep. It's unbelievable.
Who's got their stimulus check? Have any of you guys?
Nope.
Oh yeah, I told you guys on Friday I checked the IRS website and I have the classic there's something wrong here, and I'll get it mailed to my old address that I don't live at anymore for sure.
That's 0 for 4 then. I haven't got it. My girlfriend's got hers.
Is that creates tension in the house?
Yeah.
Just to put a button on this, there was an essay that came out in The Cut 11 days ago. I'm going to share it now. On applying for unemployment is my new full-time job. And this author, Natasha Frid, called over nearly 1,000 times in 3 days and did not speak to a human in that time. So
I feel like there's a Jerry Seinfeld stand-up bit about this. Like, what's the deal with unemployment? You don't have a job. Getting unemployment's full-time job. Am I making this up? I feel like this is
you
real.
think you're one that already exists? I I was going to say, like, I don't really think, like,
I mean, not him.
employment.
But...
Who cares? Why should I give a shit? I've got 45 cars.
You've got free streaming.
So what's going on right now in Denver? And this is happening across the country in specific states. I mean, let's be clear about this. It is happening in specific states and for usually a specific reason. And it's, people are saying, like, Vox has this thing, protests at state are spreading despite most Americans' fear of reopening. Now, the bottom line of let me just give you a broad sense of what's happening here. Donald Trump wants to reopen on May 15th. He wants to shift blame to Democratic governors. He wants to make this story that the economy sucks in September because of Democratic governors. So the game plan is this. We're going to push for states to reopen. And I don't even think they really want them to necessarily. But we're going to push for it. We're going to make it seem as if these Democratic governors are overstepping the line, that they are overreacting because they want to hurt Donald Trump. And that's why you have like DeVos, and that's why you have these militias basically mobilizing to go out and do these protests. Florida, North Carolina, Virginia, Michigan, Minnesota. I mean, honestly, if I was to say to you guys, name the top 12 states that are arguably or within the realm of being swing states or are bordering swing states so that there's media there or that there's maybe a tight Senate race. Idaho, Kentucky, California. Idaho seems to be the only place that we're not talking about a swing state, right? And Florida theoretically could be a swing state. People are saying because of this unemployment stuff down there, could be a swing state. North Carolina, swing state. Tom Tillis in a big race there. Virginia used to be a swing state. Maybe they want to get some state Senate seats back. Michigan, swing state. Minnesota could be in play. That's what we were told last time around. Like I say, Idaho, I think it's just a bunch of militia people out there. But Kentucky, Mitch McConnell, outraised in money. I don't know if he's going to lose, but. And then California, which I think is obviously not. But they don't want. I mean, that's why they're doing this. And then, of course, you get Alex Jones doing it at one place. But here is it happening in Colorado. There's Cory Gardner is in a tight race there. And here is some of the protests from Colorado. Are these just pictures? Because there's here's some, I don't know if these are pictures, right? Are these videos? Okay. Yeah. Play this. These are some nurses who have basically been working in these hospitals or standing out there basically just to remind these idiots what's going on. And look at the signs. The signs say, we don't believe you, essentially. Like, where are the bodies? Play this. Now, to be clear, these nurses are standing out in the crosswalk during red lights only. They're not blocking traffic. They're just out there standing in the crosswalk during red lights to let people to give these idiots some semblance. And I'm sorry, they're idiots. They are idiots. Some semblance of the stakes that are involved here. Some of the signs I saw were like, that one was like, what, land of the free or something, but some were like, where are the bodies?
Oh, yeah. I saw my body, my choice, which is pretty twisted. Yep. Also, social distancing equals communism, which LOL, I wish that were true, because then we'd have communism in New York right now.
I think, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see. And supposedly I've seen some stories that the White House is a little bit concerned that these non-social distancing protests are going to lead to hotspots in certain places. I don't wish this on anyone, but it's hard not to, let's put it that way, when you see this kind of stuff.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, but there's no way that most of these protesters are working class people who are desperate to get back to work so they can earn a wage. This is some fake ass AstroTurf Tea Party nonsense. And I think a lot of them are probably small business tyrants who are Trump's base and want to resume exploiting people.
Well, I mean, look, the small businesses, we have small businesses that are dropping like flies. And I don't think that, you know, for me, I don't really think that's the issue. These people don't like social distancing because it is, I don't know that it's a financial issue for them at all. It may be in some instances. Certainly everybody's hurting. You want to protest, you can go and protest your state failure to provide unemployment. You can go protest the fact that Ruth Chris, one of Sean Hannity's longtime sponsors, one of Donald Trump's buddies, is getting millions of dollars of supposedly, I mean, they're a multi-million dollar company with hundreds upon hundreds of employees. And they've laid off workers at their restaurants, and they're just paying their executives with this paycheck protection stuff. I can understand protesting that, but this is what we're seeing are people who are protesting because they are morons, because they do not believe. Well, part of it is just that they don't want it to exist. And therefore, the way they respond to these things, when there is an attempt to any type of like communitarian response, and frankly, there is only one type of response to a pandemic, and that is a communitarian one. That is one that fundamentally recognizes the relationship between us as human beings is the key. And particularly at the beginning of this. But every aspect of a solution out of this is communitarian by definition. And so these people hate it because they have been trained to hate it, because they see it infringing upon their belief that we are, you know, individuals, and that we should have a free market, and that there should be no government involvement in any of these things. Constitution doesn't say anything about protecting us from a pandemic. Doesn't say anything about coronavirus. Therefore, none of this can exist. They are morons.
Well, and their SUVs are basically an embodiment of that trying to insulate themselves from other people thing. That's what these giant $40,000, $50,000 SUVs are.
Right. And, but, you know, I mean, to be fair, you can see this amongst, I think, like I have no doubt that there are working class people involved in it in Michigan or in other states. It just so happens that one truck there in Colorado, they're all in their cars, which is interesting. What they should do is they should basically be marching with their comrades and breathing all over each other.
Yeah. I mean, I think, like you said, this goes beyond any kind of economic anxiety or ideology, even for a lot of these people. And it's just people who are cracked enough in the brain to believe the conspiracy theories, like the one about how COVID is a hoax. And, you know, we're really going to test out Trump's theory that he could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody, and these people would still support him, right? Because they're going to start seeing their friends die.
I mean, at least in that case, he would only be killing one person. pandemic response is a much more significant body count.
Do we have a clip of Alex Jones, his protest? Did I send that along, Brendan?
I can look for that. Now I have that now. I can pull something.
Alex Jones. I mean, there was like maybe 150 people there. That's going to be an interesting hotspot in Austin, Texas. Let's take some IMs. Hugo 420. Hugo 420. What's your favorite tool and brand of tools? Are you a brand guy? I am not a brand guy. I guess I have DeWalt power driver and drill because I want to share batteries. That's basically it. But I mean, I covet some Festools, but those are super expensive. But I would love one of those track saws and even a Festool shop vac. That would be fantastic.
Shop vacs are good. I have to say my favorite tool is the one that puts out a psych rock album once every 12 to 15 years.
I was waiting for. Oh, that reminds me, Jamie, I got this email and I wanted to read it. Hi, everyone. I'm very new to the show, but my wife isn't. You've managed to radicalize her into a full democratic socialist. So congratulations on that. I think I describe myself as a social democrat because I think that a superb social safety net plus tightly regulated capitalism is best. But I'm also now just seeing how incredibly broad the term socialism is, and I feel more confused than ever. Anyway, my question is this. In a society with no private business capitalism, how do you maintain creative freedom, especially for non-necessities, niche products, and outlandish/risky ideas, or the kinds of products that people don't know they want until they have them? As an example of all the above, let's say that someone has a great but unorthodox idea for a video game that caters to some specific audience. This game needs a big team with lots of different skills and widely different levels of passion for the project. How do you incentivize the non-passionate to do boring or difficult, though not unethical work without paying them? Even for the passionate, it could be difficult to retain their labor on something long and at times frustrating. I've given up on enough personal projects to know that very well. I'm interested in hearing all of your responses. I mean, I think what he's talking about with not paying is more communism, right, Jamie?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different versions of socialism and communism that people have posited. I think with something like a video game, which I think most people can agree is not something that's really essential for everybody to survive, although, people may disagree on that. Matt may disagree on that. It's going to require everyone who's working on it to be passionate about it. And that's the idea behind communism, at least for me, right? It's to liberate people from having to work all the time at a job that they don't like very much on pain of starvation and devote their full creative potential to whatever drives them and whatever keeps them passionate. So if you need a whole bunch of other people to work on your passion project with you, you better hope that it's a really good idea, and then they will.
But what if there are things that need to be done on the project that are just not, I mean, as he says, I mean, just take for, as just to stipulate for the sake of this, the game needs a big team with lots of different skills, wildly different levels of passion for the project. How do you incentivize the non-passionate to do boring or difficult, though not unethical work without paying them?
Get a better idea. Otherwise, maybe your idea isn't that great in the first place. Sorry, I don't see the video game problem being like a primary thing that communists need to deal with. I think the more pressing issue is like, how do you incentivize people to do work that might be considered undesirable, like taking out the trash or whatever. And in my experience living in communal situations, that isn't necessarily the primary issue at play. I think I'd be happy to do trash duty for a day if it meant that I was contributing something positive and everyone got to have a nice life and I got to go off and have a nice life the rest of the time.
I mean, I would just say that one of the ideals of a more socialist or communist economy is that what you do for work is decoupled from your ability to sustain yourself just materially. And I think that would allow for a lot more people to follow their passions. I think, for instance, if all of a sudden...
wait, let me explain what that means to people. Okay. That means that like healthcare,
right,
maybe in housing,
right?
Maybe in education,
transportation.
Those are not things that are commodities. Therefore, you don't have to worry about paying for them. And that, once that's done, then you have the ability to go out and pursue the occupation you want. So that okay, I can do this because I can make the trade-off between my ability to go buy, take this trip or buy this thing with, how much I want from self-satisfaction from my job. And it's not a question of if I don't do this job that I hate, my kids won't have health care.
Right, exactly. And perfectly, yeah. And I think the same thing is for we see all these journalism jobs escaping, and it's well, we can't really subsidize them directly as we used to, right? The mail was a big subsidy to them. How do we create an environment where we can cultivate these jobs? And I think, it's those decommodifying essentials. And then I think there will be a lot of, my ideal of a socialist future does have a lot of sort of voluntary game makers that have all their stuff collected, because I think people would rather do that than make some crappy video game, right, about a Marvel property. So I think the actual creative people will be more liberated in that sense. I mean, I'm less interested in getting rid of all sort of private industry immediately, that sort of thing. I think, or maybe you make everything co-ops legally, or change the ownerships of that sort of. I don't know how because you don't want to have to have state control of every video game put out, right? That's not an idea of communism I would want, especially knowing our political class currently. So anyway, what do you say, Jamie?
I say let a million video games bloom. I mean, I could go into more details on how Marx wanted to actually abolish the distinction between work and leisure time and have all human activities just be things that we do in the course of life. Doesn't mean they're all going to be fun, but they're all just a part of life. And that's when we can really say that people are truly free. But I feel like maybe that's a topic for the Antifada to go into further detail on.
Folks can can find that at patreon.com/the Antifada. But just one last point on what Matt is saying. If you had the federal government, let's say, essentially subsidize, fully provide, however you want to talk about it, health insurance, housing, transportation, and this is Matt's formula: transportation, education. Then, as a reporter, let's just say for the LA Times, all I would need is, I don't know, let's just say $20,000 a year to live a pretty good life. Maybe the number is 30,000. Maybe it's, I don't know what it is. And then as the LA Times, all I have to pay is $20,000 or $30,000 to that reporter, and I can afford a lot more reporters. And then with the extra profits, theoretically, that the LA Times would make because of that, that gets paid in taxes to the government. So what you have is, and the reason why that's better than paying it directly to the reporters in that instance is because the reporter then has the freedom of going to other places and working if they want and not have to worry about all of those things like health insurance, like their education, like, maybe where they live or how they with their transportation. So the same amount of money churns around more or less. It's just that there is less. It's really a question of control at that point. And the conservatives fear that the government will have control, but we have a lot more power over government, frankly, than we do corporations. And to the extent that we don't have power over our government at this point, it is because of the power that corporations and moneyed interests have, because they are basically have turned our democracy into a plutocracy because they were a plutonomy.
Yep. Oh, and another function that would serve, because reporters do get paid very crappily in most cases, and the media is disproportionately drawn from the upper classes, and you can see the implications for that in the kinds of news and the kinds of stories that we get. So maybe if people had these needs taken care of, the media wouldn't be completely a club full of rich kids.
Right. The system would be different. People would be the people who are seeking internships wouldn't just be people whose parents could afford to subsidize their summer. It would be everybody. You would take money out of the equation as a determining factor as to what opportunities are available to you. Dolink on the IM. How can anyone know if there's a flattening of the curve when only 1% have been tested and 1/5 of those tested are positive? Okay, this is what the flattening of the curve means, is that we have been able to control the spike that comes when the virus is out there and people are not behaving in a way that diminishes the contagious quality of the virus. So there's a flattening of the curve, and we measure that by how many people are infected and going into the hospital at any given time. But that doesn't mean that we've impacted the virus. It just means we've changed the context in which the virus operates. And that is the problem, is that by flattening the curve, what we've done is been able to make sure that the number of people infected is less than our medical capacity to treat those people. So we're not having people die because our hospital does not have any more ICU beds. We're not having people die because our hospital doesn't have enough ventilators. We're still having people die because the virus is very fatal relative to other viruses. It's also very contagious, which is why we need to maintain stay at home and social distance. The bottom line is that there's a long tail on this, which means that it's just as virulent, and we've only impacted the contagious nature of it because we've changed our behavior. The virus hasn't changed its behavior. There are instances where a virus can change its behavior in some way and die out, essentially. Conceivable it would happen, but there's no indication that's going to happen. So the bottom line is, if we were to go back out tomorrow and behave as we were in March 12th, at least in the context of New York, it would take about another 2 or 3 weeks, and then the spike would happen again. And at that point, the curve would be unflattened, which is why, we're going to be doing some version of this for quite a while. That's just the reality.
Yeah, I'm worried that we're going to do a good job in New York, and then the virus is going to keep coming back because idiots in other states aren't doing it.
But here's the thing. The virus, well, yes, the virus is not gone in New York. And it's conceivable if we had a bubble around New York and we did this for long enough, it's conceivable it would go away. But people are coming into New York and that's not going to stop. And at one point we're going to be in New York and we're going to say, like, I can't do this anymore. I mean, we're going to have a moment of reckoning, and I don't know when it's going to come. But there's going to be a moment of reckoning. And that's why the only things you can do on some level to at least change the dynamic slightly is massive testing. And so that, and then it really just becomes, that's how much elasticity there is in the social distance. In other words, I can go into work if I've been tested and I have some, or maybe there's a quick test that happens, at the front door of work. Only people who are, but you also need to rely on the tests. And what happened, the FDA said, anybody can flood the market with antibody tests, but then all of a sudden, like, they don't work. We ran out of swabs for testing. Finally, Donald Trump has exercised the Defense Production Act and has required a company to produce more swabs at a fair, markup. but they have to produce X amount of swabs.
Wow. What classified information do you think convinced him to do that?
I will tell you what information. Well, one, we don't have the swabs. Two, I think he looked around and found out that he didn't have any friends who were in the swab making business and that there wasn't enough markup. And believe me, if there was an ability for somebody to make a real buck on that, they would have waited another couple of months before they did this. I mean, that's the bottom line. It's what they've been running has been just, I think, there's one agency now, the Government Accountability Office is the only oversight agency that exists now in the government that he cannot dismantle because it is out of, it is under legislative purview. Here's Donald Trump as part of his crap show. I guess this one was from yesterday. He was asked by Weijia Zhang, I don't know where she's from.
CBS.
CBS. About travel from China. Now, Trump is trying to make this, and the whole China stuff is just, I don't know.
Ominous.
It's ominous. He is trying to make it seem like he did everything he could by banning travel from China. And she is going in on him about like, what? Here we go.
About you, that you should have warned them the virus was spreading like wildfire through the month of February instead of holding rallies with thousands of people. Why did you wait so long to warn them?
Who you with?
And why did you not have social distancing until March 16th?
Who you with?
I'm Weijia Zhang with CBS News.
So if you look at what I did in terms of cutting off or banning China from coming in.
Chinese nationals. But by the way, not Americans who are also
nice and easy.
China.
Nice and easy. Just relax. We cut it off. People were amazed.
Pause it for 1 second. Nice and easy. Just relax, honey. To be clear, ban Chinese nationals, not Americans returning home from China. Did it after 45 other countries had done it. Stop there, even though ultimately we ended up getting coronavirus from Europe. But continue.
Gentlemen, everybody was amazed that I did it. We had 21 people in a room. Everybody was against it but me. Dr. Fauci said, had I not done that, perhaps tens of thousands, and maybe much more than that, people would have died. I was very early, very, very early. And we just you saw Brett Baer making a statement. They had a debate well into February and not even mentioned. It wasn't even mentioned, the Democrats. We were very early. Oh, I'm the president. And you know what I just did? And you know what I just...
And by the way, when you issued the ban, the virus was already here.
Okay, and you know how many people, when I issued the ban, how many cases of virus were in the United States when I issued the ban? Do you know the number? No. How many cases? Remember, I said one person. How many cases were here when I issued the ban?
But did you know?
No. You have to do your research. How many?
I did my research. On the 23rd of March, you said you knew this was going to be a pandemic.
Can I tell you what? I did know it. I did know it. All I have to do is look.
So you knew
anybody knew it. Just, are you ready? How many cases were in the United States when I did my ban? How many people had died in the United States?
So do you acknowledge that you didn't think?
Keep your voice down, please. Keep your voice down.
Did you not?
How many cases were in the United States? I did a ban where I'm closing up the entire country. How many people died?
And that's a fair point.
How many people died in the United States? And yet I closed up the country, and I believe there were no deaths, 0 deaths at the time I closed up the country. Nobody was there. And you should say thank you very much for good judgment.
Just quiet down. Quiet down. We've had 41,000 plus deaths. I'm sure that number is not up to date because it was from a couple hours ago in this country. Since that time, he wants a cookie because he banned Chinese nationals from flying into the country after 45 other countries did it because there were no deaths at that time. And then he went on to have rallies. to say that the whole thing was a hoax. The whole thing was a hoax. And did nothing else until what was it, March 10th, essentially. It wasn't until March 10th. It was a Wednesday night. It was the first time that he admitted this thing was real. And, but even had he done, well, you can't separate the fact that it completely dismantled the apparatus to warn the country, to warn policymakers about this. And they did it over the course of the past 3 years. And by they, I mean the Republicans. Not just Donald Trump. Donald Trump wasn't smart enough to know that there was somebody on the National Security Council who was in charge of pandemics. Donald Trump was not smart enough to know there was somebody at the Department of Homeland Security whose job was to track pandemics. Donald Trump was not smart enough to know that there were CDC people sitting in China to watch out for pandemics. This is a Republican project.
Yep. And it concerns me that the Democrats are not doing a better job pointing that out. I don't know if you already did the Joe Biden campaign video that came out where he's basically blaming Trump for not being tough enough on China and the Chinese. Feels kind of like a xenophobia arms race.
I mean, look, there was, I think it's a bad tact. And I think that the use of the Chinese as opposed to the Chinese government, to me, in my mind, sounds a little yellow perilish. But it's also just a stupid hill to die on. Like it's a stupid hill to fight on. Now maybe there's some argument that it's supposed to be just internal and not go out to the broad public, and this is just for people in the know and as some type of pushback to get him stuck on this issue. But I just seems, I don't know, stupid. But if you want to talk about Democrats messing up, because it gets worse than that, a lot more worse in terms of material. Let's just start with this story. American Prospect reported that, and now there are 5 members of a panel that is supposed to be the Congressional Oversight Commission of the way that money gets doled out. It's all going to be in retrospect, but at least there's some accounting for it, right? There is one member from the House, one member from the Senate chosen by Democrats, one member of the House and one member of the Senate chosen by Republicans. And I think the Republicans get one other member. Maybe it's, and I imagine, I don't know if it's from the Senate or it could be from anywhere. And they don't have to be lawmakers necessarily. So the first person who was chosen by the Democrats was this guy, Bharat Rumamurti. He is a former Warren staffer, very well situated to do this type of work. Apparently he's been tweeting and because there's no commission yet. And he's gotten the Fed to agree to publish all transactions that use public funds, some detailed information. But he has no staff. He has no office. He's just a guy tweeting and coming up with ideas on trying to create transparency. So that's good. The Republicans in the House and Senate chose Pat Toomey, who was a former Club for Growth candidate, Chamber of Commerce, essentially, mole, and some Congressman French Hill from Arkansas. I don't know who it is. So the Democrats get one other person in the House, that comes from the House. And there was only one, as far as we know, Democrat who expressed interest in this. And that is Katie Porter. Katie Porter, the Democrat you have seen eviscerate finance people. She sits on the Finance Committee. She sits on the Financial Services Committee and the Oversight Committee. literally 2 oversight committees that deal with finance and money. Perfectly situated for this. So, of course, Nancy Pelosi does not choose her. Who does Nancy Pelosi choose? She chooses a different freshman congresswoman, one who expressed no interest in the job. Donna Shalala. Shalala has no expertise in the financial industry, no expertise in the Fed. She sits on the Education and Labor and Rules Committee. She's on the Early Childhood Education Subcommittee. It's true, she was the former head of Health and Human Services. She was the secretary under Obama. But the oversight panel has absolutely nothing to do with public health or the pandemic. Has only to do with who gets payments from our government. I don't think this is the worst part about Shalala. I think it's her complete lack of interest and expertise in these things. But on her most recent financial disclosure, according to the American Prospect, dated in May 2019, she has shares in Boeing. They got a big chunk of this cash. Alaska Airlines, Spirit Aerosystems. Airlines got a big chunk of the cash. She owns Chevron, ConocoPhillips, Royal Dutch Shell, Occidental Petroleum. She owns entertainment stock in Paramount, Live Nation, AMC Theaters. She owns Choice Hotels. TripAdvisor. Nobody's taking trips. Retail and retailer brands. These are all companies that are going to be looking for bailouts. She owns somewhere between $300,000 and $615,000 of shares in United Health, where she served on the board from 2001 to 2007.
They had earnings exceeding their projections in the first quarter they announced last week.
Congratulations to them. That is so exciting for them. That's good. I wonder if that means that they won't get a bailout. Maybe they'll get a just in case.
Well, Cobra.
Oh, Cobra is getting bailed all the way out.
And so all of this is just, it's stunning. It's stunning. This is just oversight. And they're failing there. Meanwhile, Mnuchin claims that a new bailout deal is very close. Think about what the Trump administration wants. They want tons of money to go to small business, but they want tons of money to go to just about anybody. They don't care. They don't want to necessarily have it go to states and municipalities because they want, wherever that money goes, they want to make sure that it does 2 things, that it props up the stock market, 3 things, that it props up big business, and that anywhere else they will get credit for it. And so they're looking at swing states. They're looking at red states. You can look at the distribution of the Payment Protection Act and places like Nebraska where they're supporting the, go out there and don't stay at home attitude for the most part, gets a huge amount of money. But Schumer and Pelosi are getting ready basically again to refuse to use their leverage to pursue stuff that the Republicans don't want. All they're doing is fighting for stuff that the Republicans are happy to do because they're looking to pour money out the door anyways. They don't care. They've gotten everything that they really wanted, which was that $4 trillion bailout. Now they're just like looking for political cover. So sending money to hospitals and EMTs and this and that would destroy them politically if they didn't do it. But they're pretending so that the Democrats have something to push for. But things like voter safety, mail-by-home ballots, 70% of the public, that includes a lot of Republicans, want a ballot by mail. One senator, one Democrat could shut this down by refusing to offer unanimous consent. Remember, the House almost had to come home because of one congressman. Somebody's got to stand up and be willing to be the person who is the a-hole. And the thing is, they will be protected. It's just not happening. They're just not doing it.
So, one thing, Sam, that I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention why Donna Shalala probably received this was her efforts during the first coronavirus protection bill in March. Check this out.
Mr. Chairman,
this is my
It's not sicko mode, but it's good.
Wow.
Was that
Thanks
supposed to be like if we had Hillary?
That happened.
Was that supposed to be if we had Hillary Clinton? Would this wouldn't happen? Is that what it is?
I think it's just, rallying support and saying that we're going to get through this thing. This is our fight song.
Well, wasn't that also Clinton's song?
Yeah.
Well, okay. Well, that should cover us. That should give us the financial oversight we need. Unbelievable.
It's a real can't they both lose moment.
So, like I said earlier, Donald Trump finally used the Defense Protection Act to require an anonymous company to produce swabs. They couldn't do the testing because they didn't have the swabs. You know where the big manufacturer of swabs was in the world? Take a guess, Jamie.
Where the big manufacturer of swabs was? China.
Lombardy, Italy.
Oh, wow.
The other place that was devastated by coronavirus. So we have this shortage of swabs. He finally breaks down because apparently he can't find a buddy who's in the swab business. Here he is asked by Alice Olstein. She's the Politico healthcare reporter. Why Trump delayed so long when we've been talking about the shortage of swabs for a month. I mean, I know we talked about it when I was up here in this fake studio. I mean, I guess both studios are fake. But so it's been almost a month. Play this. With sound.
You said swabs are easy, and this has been something that hospitals and states have been saying there are shortages for more than a month now. Why wait to use the Defense Production Act until now?
Well, we already have millions coming in. We have one company that we're forced to use it with, and probably by tomorrow we won't be. You know, it's a tremendous hammer. Probably by tomorrow it won't be, but we have millions of them coming in. They're very easy by comparison. And in all fairness, governors could get them themselves. They really could. All of this, but we're going to do it. We're going to work with the governors, and if they can't do it, we're going to do it. If they do it, we can do it maybe cheaper, better. We're getting very high quality. With us, it's all quality too. Even if it takes a little bit longer, we want the highest quality in all of it, including the ventilators. So, we have millions of them coming in very soon, and many of them already have been ordered, and the governors don't know quite where they are, but they'll be finding them fairly soon.
You know, the idea that every single question after that wouldn't be a follow-up on that. Excuse me, sir. The question was, why did you wait a month? Not that they're in the mail now, which is also a lie. His big tell is when he looks back for one of his cronies to nod so that it makes it look like his lie is legit. But the question was, why did you wait a month when we have all known that there are shortages? And then the lie, we're trying to get high quality swabs, the best quality swabs, because you want them to be able to be reused like you would all used swabs. That's absurd. There's no high quality swab. What the hell does that mean? It's just the level of lying. It's just stunning.
He's doing a commercial.
He's doing a really crappy commercial. And they should be forming compacts in the, like every day they go in there and they should pick like 3 questions. And that's it. We're going to get them to answer these 3 questions.
Mm-hmm. No matter how many times he tries to bully various reporters.
I know I talked about this earlier, but I want to just remind people there was a letter published in the New England Journal of Medicine. And this is right up, you can see this right up in New York Magazine, where the federal government is literally confiscating this material from states so they can give it to private enterprise to resell it at another markup. It's effing nuts. Let's play this. Donald Trump is now basically competing with us in terms of a YouTube show. And I'm just waiting for him to introduce the pause it feature that we have a trademark for on this program. He is trying to show a clip of Cuomo ostensibly praising him. And he really wants this played because he knows that this is just an advertisement for him, this whole show. But let's watch this so that we can laugh at him.
Clip that I thought would be appropriate to put up today. It'll take 2 minutes, and I think you'll find it interesting, but we appreciate it. And let's see if we can do that. You'll turn out the lights, and we'll see if we can do that. Thank you.
President, what the federal government did, working with the states, as I just said, was a phenomenal accomplishment. We bent the curve. We flattened the curve.
He's a good-looking guy.
Government did it. People did it. But government facilitates people's actions, right? We had to double the hospital capacity in New York State. That's what all the experts said. President brought in the Army Corps of Engineers. They built 2,500 beds at Javits that Michael and Northwell were operating. It was a phenomenal accomplishment. Close to 1,000 people have gone through Javits. Luckily, we didn't need the 2,500 beds, but all the projections said we did need it, and more, by the way.
There he is. Now he's upset. He's upset because, wait, he didn't get to the best part where he really supports what I'm doing. Let's play it.
They had something else. Are they finished with it? They left out the good part. Great job, fellas.
What was the good part?
They did a better job on ventilators. No. Andrew had something else to say that was really nice, but we won't go through that. But he really, it was really a good statement. Do you want to put the rest of it up, or do you not have it? I just think it's so good because it's bipartisan. You know, this is not about Democrats, Republicans. This is about a thing that hit our country, the likes of which has never happened to us before. Wars, those wars, Civil War, sure, but the First World War, the Second World War, they're not fought on this country. This is being fought in this country, but it's being fought in 184 countries all over the world. It's terrible. But I want to thank Andrew, Governor Cuomo, for the statement. He actually, if you go a little bit further, it was even far beyond even that. So it was good. You remember? Huh? We're going to try to work on getting the first part. Well, that's okay. Whatever. But he said some really good things. And And that's it makes people feel good. It's actually the Wall Street Journal. Christopher was saying, I want to make people feel good too. I want to make.
Hey guys, do you have that email that got sent in about me? Can you? Would you mind reading the part where it's a good part about me?
It's the first time I've ever felt sympathetic to someone on Trump's staff.
Right, guys. That's the wrong clip. Where's the part where he's praising me?
It's the first time Sam's ever felt sympathetic to Trump.
That's right. I understand what he's going through. I mean, he thought the whole clip was there. He thought the part where it was praising him was coming up, and it didn't show up. It's all right. The moment's gone. But what he said was really very nice to me. It was very nice about me. It was very complimentary to me. The guy's an effing lunatic. He's insane.
I'm just sorry for all your sakes. You couldn't hear it for you. I've already heard it.
I just want it for you for the bipartisanship, so that you know that like everything is fine. Incidentally, also I want to encourage militia people to attack Governor Whitmer in Michigan. Incidentally, also that, and in Virginia too. Same.
Does this mean he's going to challenge you to come on his YouTube show and debate him?
I will debate Donald Trump. I'm not going to. Yeah, I've got so many more views than he does. I'm not going to go on there. Why would I bother? One of the other projects that the Republicans have been up to in the wake of them trying to have to explain away how they have created unemployment systems that don't help people, how they basically saw so much waste in our government that they got rid of the stuff that would have probably mitigated, at the very least, mitigated this disaster. Here is Newt Gingrich. He's still alive. I don't know. Does he have a book out?
I think he's holed up in the Vatican, actually, with
Are you serious?
Costello, yeah. Because his wife is the ambassador to the Vatican.
And here he is. What a perfect place to say this from, the Vatican, that the Democrats are probably hoping for the economy to crash and people to suffer.
I'm sure you saw some of the video of the various protests around the country regarding the stay-at-home orders. One of the big ones was in Denver, Colorado yesterday, and the Denver Post talked to a fellow by the name of Jim Finnemore, and he said that he thinks that Democrats are using the coronavirus as a political tool, he said, to crash the economy and hurt the president so that he loses. You don't think there are politics like that involved in these calculations, do you?
To be honest, I don't think that Schumer and Pelosi mind, or that Biden minds, if the economy doesn't quite recover rapidly. I mean, they're faced with a nightmare. If the president finishes handling the coronavirus as well as I think he will, and he then pivots and uses all of his ability to create a strong economy, and by September and October, you can tell that we're coming back. The election will be over and Trump will get reelected. Well, if you're Pelosi and Schumer, you'd sort of like to have that comeback, say, next January, but not this September. And I'm not saying that they sit down in a coldly calculated way, but I don't think that they have at any point placed putting America back to work ahead of partisan politics. And that's why for a week now, they have screwed up the small business loans, which clearly hurts because small business creates the largest number of new jobs in America. And you have a lot of small businesses saying, look, I've got about a week to go if I can't get financing. And they just sat on it. Well, you tell me why that is not, frankly, a remarkably destructive thing for them to be doing.
Mr. Speaker, why did they do that? Why are they making this political? Why did the Democrats not pass the proposal, the last proposal? I mean, is it because they don't want the president to have a win? Don't they need to put the American people ahead of anything else?
Well, look, I think that they are engaged in a game of chicken. And they've done this now several times.
I like how Kilmeade almost jumped in there because he's really, jazzed. And to be clear, Kilmeade's problem with it is that you have to use the money on the loan to cover 75% of it, to get it for free. You can get a low-cost loan for however much you want. I mean, that's available. But if you want it basically to be a grant, 75% of it's got to be spent on employees. Finnemore. This cutout that they basically just use. I'm sure the guy exists, but you're going to bring him up in every interview you do? Jim Finnemore. Did I tell you guys that Steve McKenzie, told me that like Steve Ducey is an idiot? Steve Flanagan also said that too. It's crazy. Go ahead.
To crash the economy and hurt President Trump so that in November he loses. You don't think the Democrats are trying to do that, or do you?
I don't know what the Democrats are trying to do. I do know the number 3 most powerful Democrat in Congress, the majority whip, Mr. Clyburn, said he wants to use the coronavirus to restructure government in their liberal views. I do know I watched Speaker Pelosi when we were doing the CARES Act hold it up because she wanted the Green New Deal. She wanted to make sure sanctuary cities. She wanted to change election law. And she fought for the National Endowment for the Arts. I do know that Speaker Pelosi has now held up small business from actually getting money. That's holding it up from Democrats, Green Party, Republicans, and all. That is wrong. I don't know what your motive is, but the one thing I do know, we'll only defeat this if we work together, if we put people before politics. I've watched Republicans sit in the table, just as I've done before, and make sure we work together.
There you go.
Wow. Pelosi's on board with the Green New Deal? That's news to me.
I know. That's the amazing thing about this. That's the amazing thing about this. The Democrats, the idea that the Democrats have an option as to, well, we wouldn't want to do that because that's a political loser. Well, sorry, the words exist now. So now you're tied to it. That Jim's Fenimore, though, you got to watch out for him. Wasn't he President Fenimore? Matt, wasn't there a Fenimore president?
James Fenimore Cooper. Am I making that up?
That was James Fenimore Cooper is an author. There was Millard Fenimore. I don't know if there was a.
Maybe I'm thinking of Fillmore.
These things they pop into my head when I hear the word Fenimore.
Matt, Fenimore Cooper, that's Last of the Mohicans, correct?
That is correct. Yep.
All right. Literary hangover cure coming to Patreon soon.
There's been a number of those James Fenimore Cooper episodes.
I know.
A lot of them. All right, here's Judge Janine. Let's just do Judge Janine a couple of bit. She's losing it. She got reprimanded, I think, for showing up drunk on her show. I don't know if that's true or not. Maybe that she was encouraged for the best ratings that she got.
Doing a Fox News show drunk?
How could you? Here's Judge Janine. She is really in on the whole Wuhan virus thing. And my favorite part, just listen to this.
Your models are out of control. The economy is out of control.
Wait, is this clip number 7?
Uh-oh.
Yes, I believe it is.
All right, go ahead.
China is the one that's out of control. We're not going to let you destroy this country or our way of life. We've worked too hard and we fought too long to lose it to a Wuhan. That's what I said, a Wuhan virus that China knew about, openly lied about, said it couldn't be transmitted from human to human, and intentionally protected Chinese citizens from the virus, but allowed that virus to be released, putting the rest of the world at risk. You want to control people? You politicians want to flex your muscles? Well, start working on how you're going to punish, ostracize, alienate, and financially sanction and make China accountable for what they did to us and the rest of the world. But keep your damn hands off us and do something about what got us into this mess in the first place.
I mean, oh boy, this whole China thing, it's just, there was another clip I saw of her where she said, the Wuhan virus or whatever they call COVID-19, whatever that's supposed to mean. Like that's the weird thing to refer to it. So the idea is that we should be, I guess, I don't know, bombing China now.
Well, it's very concerning because obviously it's hilarious how drunk and pissed off she is in this video. But I do worry that a dying empire with nothing left but hard power and an unpredictable leader might be inclined to start a war with China. And this feels like they're trying to keep that option open.
I've got a hotel that's opening up there, so that will not be happening.
Like, that would be the only reason. Or that, and like China exercising an enormous amount of restraint, just like Iran did.
I mean, I think like this is the thing about the Biden ad that could have been, you know, I personally think it's sort of a, you know, a bank shot off a bank shot off a bank shot. But the idea that he dropped the ball in terms of assessing what was happening in China because he wanted to make sure that his trade deal was okay. I think that's true, but that just seems to be like fifth order relevance. And I don't know if it's just to confuse the message, like when Jeanine Pirro says this stuff. I don't know. I don't know what the theory could possibly be behind that, but it was also executed poorly.
Yeah.
Here's another clip from Judge Jeanine. She is mad, man. She is mad because, you know, Judge Jeanine living in Westchester, she's for the people. Don't you know that? You knew that, Jamie, right?
Of course.
Did you see her at the DSA Brooklyn North meeting? She would come in. She was just like on loan from the West.
Every single month.
Here she is. She's pissed. This could be a function of like, and I've felt this certainly, like I wanted to day drink many, many times over the past couple of weeks. But, you know, I'm in the middle of doing my show. Maybe this is what she's pissed about. This is clip number 8.
Sheltered in their homes who've been patiently watching this unfold have seen the data, and the facts change from day to day. First, there were 2.2 million who were supposed to die in the United States, and then it was 1 million, then it was 500,000, then 250,000. And supposedly, mitigation was already taken into account in those numbers. But the models, folks, are just plain wrong. And today, a potentially lower death rate. And we understand there are still many sick and dying, and density and hotspots are to be treated differently. But what about the rest of us? We want to go back to work, feed our families. And as the governors sit there and pontificate, we are the ones experiencing the reality that for every percentage drop in employment, there are 5,000 to 10,000 deaths occurring. Depression, suicide, domestic violence, child abuse, resurgence of alcoholism, drug addiction, loss of hope, battered women locked at home with their abusers, abused children not being identified or protected because they cannot go to school. I'll wear my mask, my gloves, and I'll keep my distance, and I'll do the testing, whether to determine if I have COVID or whether I have the antibody. But don't you even think about tracing or tracking or giving me a card. It ain't happening.
I mean, this is just such nonsense. First of all, I love the fact that she is showing such solidarity. But the fact is, there is no testing. There is not enough testing that we can test. And the idea that they're upset that more people haven't died. We have over 40,000 people who have died in the course of a little bit more than a month. And that is with all of these mitigating things that we have done. Now, people can do the math, but if we go back to living like we were before, 40,000 a month is what you will get. At least that's close to 1 million a year. I mean, we can go out and we can practice a lot safer in going about our day. And maybe we can knock it down to, 20,000 a month, 10,000 a month. You're still talking about over 100,000 people. When they talk about the 60,000 number, they're just assuming that somehow it ends in the fall. And I think I'm just amazed that there is a project that exists with the president and these cronies at Fox to get people to be angry, as if people aren't just sort of like angry enough in general, to get them to be angry at the moves to mitigate this.
Well, it might work is the scary part.
Well, it might work to do what, though? Like, it's not a long-term solution. Like, I don't know what it is. Like, they've got to hope that the pressure they're creating is not actually going to bring about action. Because if it does, it's not going to work. It's not going to work.
Like, the politics of it, I feel like Trump is doing better than the Democrats, which is a low bar. But, a lot of people are so used to expecting absolutely nothing. They got that $1,200 check with his name on it, just like you predicted. And they're like, well, maybe he's doing all right.
Yeah, I think over time that opinion's going to change. All right, let's take one phone call and then we got to get out of here. I'm sorry, folks. Wish we had more time. Calling from a 920 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam. This is Patrick from Houston.
Patrick from Houston. What's on your mind, Patrick?
So I just wanted to go around, about free college tuition. I know a lot of us on the left are familiar with the sort of moderate position as to why it can't be universal. They want it to be means tested. They want it to, and they sort of justify that by saying that why should we pay for rich kids' education, even though that public high school is free for everybody from, poor to rich. I don't know if you saw Andrew Yang's interview on Rogan, where he was talking about why we can't have free public college, and he sort of adopted a different standpoint than most moderate Dems, but his logic was really just as problematic. And the reasons why he said that we can't have it, there were really three things. And he said that the first main reason is because only 33% of Americans graduate with a college degree. And so he was saying that why should we be subsidizing something that only a third of the population is using? And the 2 points I have to that are, well, a third of the population is still a lot of people. And then the second point that I have is that number would be higher, absolutely, because college education is so expensive. So if it were free, that number would be higher. Wouldn't you agree?
That number would be higher, but I mean, what that answer implies is that our government doesn't do this in every facet of our lives. Okay, yeah. Why do we subsidize mortgages as opposed to renting? Why do we subsidize homeowners? Society has determined, our government has determined, that there is value to society to have people to own homes. So we give a mortgage interest deduction on our taxes. We subsidize it. Why do we subsidize businesses in the form of building highways that are okay for tractor trailers? Why do we subsidize, I don't know, everything from football stadiums to airports to, I mean, the government makes a decision to subsidize narrow classes of people. And like you say, 33% is not a narrow class, and it would be a bigger class. But everybody benefits from the idea of having a more educated. Why do we subsidize? Why do we subsidize K through 12?
Yep.
I mean, that answer is just simply not only insufficient, it is one that is designed to make it seem like it is appealing to a special class of people. And it is not.
Well,
I mean, it's
and
okay.
then he went on to say, his answer to student loans was he called it a 10 by 10 plan. And so what that is that for 10 years, if you provide 10% of your income, you're debt free. And his justification of that was saying, well, if you don't make that much money, then you could be saving a lot more money than you would if you had student loans. But again, if you don't make that much money, you really need every cent you can get. So I really found that to be just another incremental.
And part of the, but it's not even incremental. Part of the reason why you want to do this is because you want to decouple the education from the choices that you make, because it inhibits society when you have people leaving college and in disproportionate numbers saying, I've got to go into a job like finance, or I've got to go into a job that I don't like, or I've got to go into a job that is just about money. Because then you don't get a society basically, putting their efforts into a wide range of professions that needs educated people to teach our kids, to develop medicines, to provide, across the board. And so the idea is that you want to decouple that. You want to give people an opportunity. It's not we're not paying for everybody's college. We're just providing an option. We want to not inhibit people's desire to do things that are not focused solely on making money. That's it. Appreciate the call.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
All right, let me just hit this, and I'll talk about it tomorrow. But this is I had mentioned this, I don't know, 4 or 5 weeks ago. But a Washington Post data reporter, Christopher Ingram, is on his Twitter, is publishing a BFI. This is what university is that? Oh,
I believe it's through Chicago.
Yeah. They study the effects of news coverage on the novel coronavirus by 2 most widely viewed cable shows. Viewership of Hannity relative to Tucker Carlson now. Relative to Tucker Carlson is strongly associated with a greater number of COVID-19 cases and deaths in the early stages of the pandemic. This is one of the things that we were talking about weeks ago. We should pull up that video for tomorrow, actually. I'm sure I said it somewhere. But when you watch Sean Hannity, I said, maybe I tweeted out at one point, you're going to be able to overlay the hot spots and the ratings and see a correlation between Sean Hannity fans and increase in deaths. It was obvious. These people literally have blood on their hands. Well, maybe not blood, maybe just lack of oxygen. It's nuts. We're living in an insane time that is made more insane by the insanity of these people. I mean, on some level, I can, just think about what has to go into your brain to actually believe what you're doing is right, which I imagine he does. Sean Hannity is a true believer. He's an idiot, but he is also a true believer.
He was probably devising plans on how to get back into Yankee Stadium, eat a hot dog through a mask.
The level of willful ignorance is just astonishing to me. All right, let's take 5 more IMs and we'll get out of here. Jesse, you're pretty old and I'm not gay. But if I was very old and gay, you would be the first person on my celebrity hall pass list, which is a number of celebrities you're allowed to cheat on with your significant other with. I'm not that old that I don't know what that is.
It's such a backhanded compliment.
What's backhanded about it? I took that as a straightforward compliment.
He's calling you old.
Well, I mean, look, it happens to everybody. I got news for you, Chief. You're not going to have any more time before you get old than I do. Australian Angela. Hey, Sam, it's my brother's 24th birthday tomorrow for you guys. And in light of his birthday, and it's April 1. What? It's April 1? And it's April. I wanted to suggest anyone using autism awareness to consider using hashtag autism acceptance, because we could aware by now, but we need to be more accepting. Thank you. Much love. And here is a shofar. Celebrate your brother's birthday. Happy birthday. Peter Jordanson. For many years, I've struggled with so-called apple addiction. The worst moment of my life, I started drinking ciders from the back of a local farmer's market. I was so far in, I couldn't recognize my problem. The family intervened and got me into an experimental treatment in the former Soviet Union, deep in the magical ancestral forests of Kazakhstan, where the genetic diversity of apples originates. Anyways, a lot of people don't know this, but every single apple seed from a single apple will grow a totally different and unique apple tree. I did know that, actually. I did know that. In fact, the only way to grow any apple varieties, I'm not going to read the rest because I know how it is. You take an existing apple tree and you graft it on to the rootstock of another apple tree. And that is the only way that you can decide what apple you're going to get from a tree. In fact, the only way to grow any apple varieties, by grafting cuttings from a parent tree to an existing rootstock. So in a way, you could say that in actuality, all apples are GMOs. No, you could not. Because all you're using is the rootstock as a delivery mechanism. You're not changing the genetic makeup of the tree. The rootstock can be completely generic, and you will get, if you take a clipping from a wine sap and you put it onto the rootstock of a Honeycrisp, you will still get a wine sap. Now, what you can also do is actually have 3 different varieties on one tree. Did you know that, Jamie?
I did not.
I don't know if you could have 4, but I've seen 3. You actually put rootstocks of different apple trees onto the rootstock of one tree.
You want to drop apple knowledge on this show? You better come correct.
Exactly. King of all IMers. Sam, did you find your bourbon? If not, Empire Wine in Colony delivers all over the area. In fact, that is exactly what I did. I did find Empire Wine, and I did get a shipment of some very, very nice bourbon. So I have the good stuff, which is more like the weekend thing, and then I have some others. But I got this. I'm not going to push a bourbon on here unless we get paid for it. Looking very Jerry Adams lately, Sam. Well, I got a haircut. Did we talk about that? I did, right? The divot on the side. A Square. Sam, A Square, thank you for your donation. I much appreciated. MR Crew Week 6. I think we're all starting to lose track of time. The underreported story of this pandemic is the graft and inability of an industry and right-wing ideology to provide for the welfare of its citizens. I think Matt, Jamie, and Mike talked about this last week. The people as consumer cogs in the machines and not citizens. It's hard to stay optimistic these days with the inability of Democrats to articulate a vision after this crisis and all this misery for so many. I mean, industry and right-wing ideology captured. Yeah, indeed. Anti-shoplifting jihad. It seems like COVID is drowning out climate change coverage, and I worry that the crisis allows leaders to put the climate on the back burner. I've always expected to live in some kind of dystopia, but this lack of imagination would be actually all of the above. Well, I think A, you're right, but B, the upside is right now we're in a best case scenario for the climate in terms of like cutting down on like fossil fuels and whatnot. I agree with you that it's been backburnered. In fact, I think I mentioned the other day that March was the second warmest March in the history of keeping track of how warm Marches are. But so there's a if we can prevent big oil subsidies, there could be some big benefits for this, but I don't think we'll be.
Aren't they using the crisis as an excuse to lift environmental regulations?
Totally. I got a story right here. Health, air quality in Houston since the first round of Trump's EPA rollbacks has worsened by like 60% or something.
Seems bad.
Bad. Postman Josh, and then I'll do 2 more. Thanks for the support for the post office. Most people only see the tip of the iceberg. That is the USPS. and do not realize how ridiculous it would be to privatize. There is a reason that we take packages the last mile for Amazon, FedEx, and UPS. That said, employees that have been here for decades have never seen anything like the decrease in mail volume. The threat is real, and to many companies would leap at the opportunity to privatize us. If you all want to help out, go out and buy stamps. Maybe send out some coronavirus theme cards. Call them Coronimus cards. Happy COVID days, sneezing greetings. Either way, even a little boost may be enough. And write and call your congresspeople. Thanks for the support. Yes, good idea. Get your kids to send letters. Great time to do that. DSA PMC caucus. What do you think of the idea of Bernie using his leverage to get a pick of a DNC chair? I think that would be good if he could get it. Remember when conservatives mused about running protesters over? Why don't socialists talk about for-profit government contractors more? Shouldn't those be abolished? I can think of an argument for letting them make I can't think of an argument. Indeed. Lewis, if you didn't file a 2018 tax return, you're still eligible to receive a stimulus check. Here's the link. A non-filers enter payment info here. All right. And the final IM of the day from the missing link. On the plus side, I submitted our taxes on April 13th and got the refund in direct deposit today, but still nothing about stimulus money. Oh, good for you. All right, folks.
Wait.
Oh, yeah, Jamie, go ahead.
So my producer, Andy, at the Antifada has a very cool book about Posadism coming out today, 420. And to celebrate, he's doing a stream over at the Antifada Twitch starting right now. Twitch.tv/the Antifada. He's got all kinds of cool guests coming on. Anna Merlin, friend of the show, Corey Pine, Eric Davis, and potential appearance by Comrade Communicator. So if that sounds exciting to you, check it out right now.
All right, folks. See you tomorrow.
That guy to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bulb. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made, for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive,